welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture I am going to discuss on Elvin Goldner's concept of reflexive sociology. Reflexibility will help us to understand how the discipline has evolved from the kind of positivist approach in terms of a dichotomy between the subject and object to doing away with dichotomous understanding. So today we are going to discuss on Elvin Goldner's Coming Crisis of Western Sociology, and in this we are going to focus on chapter 13, which is specifically talking about reflexive sociology. So reflexibility is the process by which the researcher reflects upon the data collection and interpretation process. So as researchers, we collect data by going to the field. Once the data is collected, we need to analyze that data and interpret it. So how do we interpret the data? As data as it is in terms of facts, or in terms of also interpreting it from our own understanding of the phenomena. In sociology, reflexibility is based on the view that it is impossible to have value neutral sociology. So in the first lecture of the series, we talked about value free sociology. Is it possible to have value free sociology? And the understanding was that as sociologists, we need to kind of interpret the society keeping in mind values, emotions, and therefore in this concept of reflexibility, it is being argued that we cannot kind of do away with the values, and that sociology should become self-aware of the impact it has on society. So we need to accept the fact that value are integral to sociological understanding, and therefore the task becomes more complex in terms of not only understanding the reality, but also in terms of how the reality is affected and affects the individual social researcher. And therefore here we are not going to talk about other scholars or other sociologists. Here the focus is to understand the term as used by Elvin Goldner. And in his concept of imagining sociology as a discipline, he kind of takes away from the positivist, functional, Parsonian model of sociology to a more reflexive sociology. It is Elvin Goldner who coined the term in his desire to kind of have a more sociology of examination of sociology as a discipline. A very substantial and exhaustive argument for a so-called reflexive sociology is found in the work The Coming Crisis in Western Sociology. Here he delves into the challenges and complexity of the sociological profession, that it's not so kind of simple in terms of understanding what the task or the role of a sociologist in terms of just studying society. It gets complicated because as a member of the society, individual is also impacted by the crisis which is happening in the society. Now, as sociologists, do they provide solution to the crisis, or are they just kind of making a sequential understanding of the crisis events? And here Elvin Goldner argues that sociologists, like all individuals, are shaped by their own domain assumptions and background assumptions, which influence their perspective and interpretation of social phenomena. That is, that what we are kind of producing as theory is very contextual. So it is affected by the time and space in which the particular research was done, and the sociologist has experienced that reality. So he or she is kind of giving us the way in which the crisis or the event has affected the society and the individual. And in a way then, Goldner's reflexive sociology critiques the notion of value-free sociology, emphasizing that sociologists inevitably bring their own biases and values to their work. So again, going back to the first lecture, we have kind of also discussed how value was integral in the works of classical sociologists like Marx, Weber, Durkheim. Here, Elvin Goldner advocated in what he means by reflexive sociology is that researchers or sociologists are well aware of the assumptions, and they are not only aware of the assumption, but those assumptions or values are affecting their research or shaping their research. So, his work also explored the tension between the desire for objectivity and the reality of subjective experience in sociological inquiry. So, are the object and the subject pole apart, or does the subject influences the interpretation of the basically what is being understood is that there is a subjective understanding of the object as well. So, Goldner in his work argues that understanding social theory and theorist is crucial for determining whether work presents reality or illusion. Therefore, it is important to understand how social theories are actually made in relation with the social reality. So, if we are studying the society, if we are studying everyday phenomena, then our theory cannot be something which is illusionary or something to do away from the reality. So, more than important to kind of understand what the theory is, it's equally important to understand how the theory was made, under what context was the theory, and therefore it also kind of helps us to connect with the biography of the sociologist, the time, the space in which the particular research or particular theory is being constructed. And that is there why he kind of needs to understand that reflexive sociology becomes significant. So, when we look into the need for reflexive sociology, Goldner argues against the prevailing notion of value free, epitomized by figures like Talcott Parson, which he saw as a facade masking the inherent values and interest of the sociologist. So, when we look into the functionalist interpretation of social stratification as necessity, it kind of starts questioning that it will therefore kind of continue with the consensus, and there is no space for conflict, for tension, and therefore the other side of the story would remain incomplete. Goldner argues that when sociologists are consciously turning the analytical lens upon themselves, their profession, and the social context of the knowledge production, what does this implies? That as sociology is doing social research, the first important task is to have self-awareness. We are aware of the domain assumptions, the under-examined beliefs and values that shape their understanding of the social world. So, if we as a kind of a researcher, as a feminist method to understand patriarchy, the domain assumption of the unequal relation between men and women is already is out there, and the sociologist has to be aware of that unequal or the biased relation in society. Number two, he says, it's important to contextualize knowledge, recognizing that sociological theories are not detached, objective truths, but are product of specific historical, social and personal circumstances. So, any reality is not as it is. So, if you kind of shift that reality from a particular point, from a particular space to another, the interpretation of that reality will change, and so would the theory. Therefore, if it is very important to understand that you need to contextualize your findings, your data, that is the core of the research. The third need for the reflexive sociology is moral and political commitment. Rejecting the idea that sociology can or should remain neutral on social issues, Goldner argues for a sociology that is morally and politically engaged, aiming to address social inequalities and promote human liberation. And therefore, if we kind of see that he is pitching for sociologists to reflect on their own research, on the data that is to kind of let emotions, let values impact the research that is being done. And what is important is that we need to understand how theories are made or how theories are constructed, and for to make sense of how theory are connected to the personal roots of the researcher. In this section, Goldner argues against the illusion of purely objective theorization. He contends that rather than emerging solely from dispassionate research and empirical validation, much of social theory is initially sparked and sustained by personally experienced fact. So many a time we've seen sociologists kind of doing research on a particular event that affected their life, on a particular event that affected their society. So the inbuilt bias or kind of inbuilt value is already before the research begins. So then it is kind of difficult to throw away that value and argue for objective research. These aren't just abstract data points, they are vivid, lived encounters with significant social phenomena like revolutions, economic crisis, or cultural shift. And that takes us to the entire evolution of the discipline of sociology, which already took place at the time of revolution, the French Revolution, the Industrial Revolution. And if we look into all the founding figures of fathers of sociology, they were responding to the crisis. They were responding to the economic crisis and cultural shift that is taking place. And then can it be then argued that these sociologists who were kind of providing a solution to these crises were abstract from the values or the emotions? It would be no. Theorists often don't start by meticulously researching every fact. Instead, they operate with certain facts already taken as given, profoundly shaped by their personal encounters. The power of these facts lies in their personal reality. When a theorist sees or experiences something profound, say the impact of Great Depression or the rise of a new consumer culture, its reality isn't questioned. It's accepted as undeniably true because it has been personally witnessed or felt. So, if we kind of look into any kind of theory of whether it's be on consumer culture or on the economic crisis, it's not kind of questioning why this the crisis took place, but on the other side, it kind of tells us how individual were coping to this crisis. So, at first point is the crisis has been accepted as a reality, as a truth, and then it has been kind of dealt with in terms of their personal experience. For these theorists, the challenge isn't to prove the existence or reliability of these facts. That's already settled by their experience. The real work lies in ordering them, seeking to understand their meaning, interconnectedness, and implications. Ultimately, much of social theorizing becomes an effort to make sense of one's experience and to resolve unresolved experiences. It is an intellectual journey to grasp the deeper significance of events that have already left a strong personal imprint. So, theories of social evolution, social transformations are kind of responding in terms of how these crises has impacted the interpersonal relations. So, it is accepting that reality as truth and then trying to understand which are the areas where certain kind of crisis has resolved or there are areas which has got remain unresolved. If it is unresolved, why is it impacting the relations or the social structure in the way in which it is. So, when we look into the idea of the social theorization, or the way in which social theories are reflection of the personal reality of the researcher, he says what the implication of such crisis or events on sociological practices. And here he insists on profound that the implications of objectivity is profound, and it can he is challenging the notion of a detached purely scientific sociology. He suggests that subjectivity is inescapable. The sociologist's personal life, experiences, and backgrounds are not external to the theorizing, but are fundamental to its genesis. This aligns perfectly with what he calls reflexibility. Sociologists must acknowledge and critically examine the personal wellspring of their ideas. The second implication for sociological practice is theory as sense making. Theory isn't about abstract models, it's a deep human impulse to understand the world we inhabit and a place within it. So, it's not the research is not on abstract ideas which we cannot feel or which we cannot express, unlike the physical sciences. Here, the research is about every feeling, every behavior of individual which the researcher in a way or the other has himself or herself experienced it. So, therefore, subjectivity is kind of inbuilt into the theory construction. It is the idea that when we kind of do any kind of research, what is the objective? The objective is to impose order and meaning on the chaos of lived experience. So, as social science practitioner or as scientist of the society, one of the core argument that Goldner is making, that theories were responding to the crisis, they were providing solutions. If we kind of look into the classical theorists, we will see each of them were responding to a particular crisis, and they were also suggesting certain ways of coming out of this chaos, and this chaos was impacting the relations, the structure and institutions. What a theorist experiences and deems real might be fundamentally different from what another differently situated theories experiences. So, much of the theory building was happening, say, in the Western context within the model of transformation from, say, a peasant based economy to a market based introduction of technology to a kind of a more urban society. So, these theories were very contextual to the transformation was taking place here. It is not necessary that such a same kind of understanding of social change or evolution would take place in parts when this crisis was absent. This can lead to vastly different theoretical priorities and understanding of social reality. So, if on one side the concern is to grapple with large scale transformation, it could be that on the other side the concern of the theorist is to understand the status quo, why the change was not being possible or why the society was not responding to the change. So, when we look into understanding kind of values in social theory, Goldner was of opinion that theory was a response to value violation and threat. He introduces the concept of elements of value and the tension that arises when these values are violated by observed social realities. The core of theory making for Goldner is often a response to a dissonance between what the theorist perceive as real, that is the imputed reality, and deeply held values that this reality seems to violate. It's not enough to just observe a fact. The fact must grate against a personal or collective moral compass. For example, think of the stark reality of poverty and imputed reality violating the value of equality of human dignity. So, there are certain kind of theories which are kind of seen as violation of the value and the thus as a kind of a threat. Sometimes the issue isn't outright violation, but an uncertainty about the value of a particular social phenomena. Theory then becomes an attempt to resolve this ambiguity and assign meaning. Goldner contends that theory making is frequently an effort to cope with a threat. This isn't an abstract intellectual threat, it's a threat to something in which the theorist is deeply and personally implicated and which he holds dear. And therefore, he is saying that most of the theorists or social theory can be divided into two types, the permitted social forms and the unmet. So, he is unconsciously constructing a social map of the social world, in which he says that there are two types. One is the permitted and the second is the world of unpermitted value. So, permitted is the normal world. These are social realities, states or processes that align with the theorist's fundamental values, assumption and sense of how the world should be. They represent order, predictability and a sense of rightness. They are the comfortable, understandable aspect of social life. The second type of the social world are the unpermitted or the abnormal. These are social realities that clash with the theorist's values, disrupt their sense of order, or pose a fundamental challenge to their worldview. They are the anomalies, the injustice, the irrationality, or the disintegrative forces that stand in stark contrast to the permitted ideal. These unpermitted worlds are often the spark for theoretical inquiry. So, what is normal, what is kind of acceptable doesn't kind of bring in any quest to know or further research. So, it is the relation of the theory is with the unpermitted world. So, theory according to Goldner is a transformative act. It transforms the permitted into unpermitted world. And the crucial insight here is that theorizing begins when the theorist encounters or perceives the possibility of an unpermitted world. And more than just observing it, a significant part of the theory work becomes an effort to transform this unpermitted world into a permitted one, thereby normalizing his universe. This transformation can occur in a few ways. Number one, eliminating or reducing the threat. The theory aims to understand the unpermitted phenomena in a way that either explains it away or suggests way to overcome it or frame it within a larger context. So, basically if there is a transformation which is kind of away from the normative, then this transformation is seen as negative and the effort is to go back to the normal. For example, a theory of social control might seek to explain how deviant, which is unpermitted, behavior can be managed or reintegrated into a normal social order. So, if we look into the theory of socialization, was basically in terms of to follow the norms of the family. So, you transform the unpermitted behavior into the permitted one. And the second way of transforming this act is strengthening and fortifying the permitted. The theory might focus on articulating and reinforcing the conditions that maintain the permitted world, often offering insight into how to protect it from becoming unpermitted. For instance, a theory of democracy might explore the institution and cultural practices necessary to prevent a decay in authoritarianism. So, when we look into Goldner's idea, he basically critiques Talcott Parson and functionalist and as even the positivist approach to understanding social reality, and therefore to kind of come to a conclusion, he argues, Elvin Goldner argues, that social theory is not merely a descriptive or analytical exercise. It is deeply value driven enterprise born from the theorist's personal experience and the attempt to manage the tension between the permitted and the unpermitted world. The theoretical work, sociologists tactically engage in a moral and political project, validating what they deem good and potent while invalidating what they perceive as bad and weak. With this conclusion, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.